had something I was thinking about. That's not going to work for me. So just stand there. I think we're good. I think you got it. So that didn't work for me. There's a verse I was looking at. It says, Udasina vadasina gunai yona vichalyate guna vartanta ityenam yovatishtati ningate. The verse says that you should udasina vat asina. You should sit as if you're sitting above it all. You know, like the word asana in Sanskrit? Asana means seat. Like if you welcome someone, if you're doing puja, the first thing you do when you greet the deity is swagatam suswagatam. You welcome the deity, and then you say idam asanam. This is a seat for you, and you offer them a seat. So when you're doing deity worship, like full deity worship, not like the play stuff that people do sometimes. They get a deity and ring a bell and stuff like that. But like if you actually sit down and learn our system of worship, when you offer Shodashopachar, 16 items in the morning to the deity, the first item you do is you welcome the deity, and then you offer the deity a seat. And when you offer the deity a seat, you say idam asanam, and you say the name of the deity. And so you say, this is a seat. I'm offering you a seat. Please sit down. It's the first thing you do when somebody comes into your house. You offer them a seat, a glass of water, some kind words. And so in deity worship, in a lot of ways, you extend the same kindness to the deity that you would extend to a respected guest. Yeah, so jump up on the chair and try and do it. I mean, you guys should have figured this out before I started giving class. Can't do it? Then just turn it off. Huh? It's cool. I think you had it there. I think you got it there. Looks like we're good. Leave it. So, asana means seat. And then you can make it into a verb. Yukta asita matparaha. He who sits with me is the highest object, yoga to me. So you can make the word asana into a verb. It's a noun and a verb. So this verse says udasina. Ut means up above, so you're seated above it all. Udasina vat. Vat means like with that characteristic. So you're seated as if you're above it all. Asina. Udasina vat asina. You're seated as if you're seated above it all. Do you guys follow that? Yeah. You're looking like you didn't get it. Did I not do a good job of explaining? Did you follow it? Yeah. Okay. All right. So I just thought you guys would find that interesting because you know the word asana from doing yoga. It's a noun and it's a verb, and you can use it in clever ways in Sanskrit. Udasina vat asina. You're seated as if you're seated above everything. And Krishna uses that language for himself too. Krishna, and so this place, that language is used for us. But Krishna uses the same language to describe himself in the 9th chapter. And so he says, Udasina vad asina, and then gunaina vichalyate. Gunayo na vichalyate, guna vartanta ityenam, ya vatishtati nengate. You're not flickering, you're not vacillating, you're not wavering. And your mind isn't moved by the gunas, and you think guna vartanta iti. Iti in Sanskrit is like quotation marks. You think guna vartanta means the gunas are working. So you got to know what the gunas are. The gunas are the ropes that bind us and control most people's actions. Most people are slaves to the gunas, and they operate as the gunas dictate. And so we might say the gunas occupy roughly the same place in this verse in English as passions, people who are addicted to their passions and their conditioning. And they're operating on a script. And there's 3 basic gunas. There's sloth, and so that's tamas, darkness. Its basic characteristic is moha, or illusion, and sleep, and lethargy. And then there's rajas. Rajas means dusty, and its basic characteristic is pravritta, activity, and it's synonymous with desire and action and endeavor. So there's people who are super excited about making it in the material world, and then there's people who just want to sit all day on the couch. And then there's sattva. Sattva here means clarity or clearness. So it's like a hierarchy. There's darkness, there's dustiness, and there's clarity. Krishna gives an analogy, a simile, to help us understand. He says that in the worst case scenario with tamas, it's like the baby covered by the womb. You know there's a baby in there, but you don't really know much else because you just see a big lump. Just obviously you know there's something, but you don't really know what. And then there's rajas is like dust on a mirror. You see the mirror, you know what it's supposed to do, but you can't use it because it's dusty and you can't use it. And then sattva is like smoke covering a flame. It may be a mild irritant, but it does not obfuscate the thing. And the thing is quite useful, actually. You can cook with a smoky fire and you're okay. You can use fire to see, and even though there's some smoke, you can tolerate it. So Krishna gives these 3 examples. Sattva's clarity, its basic characteristic is prakash, or illumination. So things get illuminated, they get darkened or beguiled, and then there's activity in between the 2. And so people are either staying the same, going up or going down. They're either lazy or they're way too hyper, or they're zen, kind of in the middle. When you're choosing jurors in the voir dire process, one of the things you have to do, the judge also participates, not just the defendant and the prosecution, but the judge will also intercede if somebody just clearly shows themselves to be ridiculously biased. If you're a commentator on a fight, or a judge on a fight, or a judge on a show, you can't have any connection to the contestants. And so we appreciate aloofness and clarity and detachment when it counts in our culture. That's why therapists can't sleep with their patients, because it just obfuscates their ability to do their job. And there's also, they have a hegemonic relationship with their patients. There's a power differential there. There's a bunch of reasons, but one of them is it obfuscates their ability to do their work. It's why yoga teachers should not sleep with their students. Lola. Just kidding. Lola's a yoga teacher. I just had to pick on somebody. I knew she'd take it. Somebody else might cry and run out of the room. And I knew she had thick skin. That's why yoga teachers shouldn't sleep with their students. There's a certain degree of clarity a teacher should have. And so, you're always, to some extent, affected by your biases and your upbringing. It's actually how you help people, is you extrapolate from your own experience and figure out how to help them. But when it gets too close, like the worst people ever to do outreach with and teach are your parents. Like the worst thing ever, to try to preach to your parents. I mean, you don't understand what I'm talking about. Your dad's a proper disciple. But if you have meat-eating, alcohol-drinking parents, they're the worst people to do outreach to. Of course, whatever. You're an exception to the rule too, Kishori. But for most of us, we do a god-awful job. I think you're probably also an exception too, right? Your mom is pretty ridiculously favorable, right? Yeah. So anyway, there are some exceptions. But for most of us, rank and file members of the tribe, you avoid doing outreach with your parents because it's just, one of Prabhupada's disciples was trying to teach his mom, and she said, "You came from here. You're going to teach me? You came from here." Right? It's like, you got nothing to say. And so there's just a natural hierarchy within that relationship with the parent. Anyway, so we appreciate actually detachment when something really counts. Sometimes we appreciate attachment because people are lazy and lethargic and just good for nothing. And so if somebody gets up and freaks out, we're like, oh, at least it's something. At least it's better than doing nothing and just sleeping all day. It's a basic feature of tamas is sleep. The basic feature of rajas is action. And the basic feature of sattva is illumination and clarity. Sometimes we glorify passion and lust because it gets people to get up, but they usually get up and run in the wrong direction really fast. And end up, building a huge house on a horrible foundation and build another one. Pretty soon they got a whole, housing development going on. A bunch of tract homes. They're all just, matchbox homes, garbage homes, just that kind of really intense desire to move forward, even if it's in the wrong direction. So sometimes we glorify, usually when it really counts, we glorify sattva. Doctors, teachers, lawyers, juries, judges. And then a lot of times we glorify passion just because it's at least some momentum, some progress, even if it's in the wrong direction. That usually, you think you're going in the right direction, so you realize you're going in the wrong direction, and you get divorced, start all over again. I think that's probably the most common way in which people who are passionate just run in the wrong direction. They go and get married, make a lifelong vow, and then end up divorcing because we have a clause where you can get rid of your lifelong vow if you want to. Pay a little coin, and you're off the hook. And then people start all over again, sometimes with a couple of kids in the mix, and it's a nightmare for them. Every metric they've come up with, kids do so much worse when their parents are divorced. Everything. Education, staying out of jail, making money, IQ, everything you can measure. Kids with broken homes do poor. And then sometimes we even glorify tamas. When do we glorify tamas? I don't know what that means. Don't give me one-word answers. Don't make any sense. Like actually speak complete sentences. So I know what you're talking about. When do we glorify Thomas?
Maybe if someone's really cynical about the material world and doesn't see any better option than just say, why bother?
Yeah, it's that kind of nihilism, sure. Of course, that might be philosophical. That you could argue that's just a clear vision of the world in which we live. But maybe it's a little bit abstract. I'm looking for something really like in your bones. Thomas is visceral. If your answer is philosophical, you didn't get it right. Yes. Yeah, something. I got so high. I was so intoxicated with the word toxic. Anytime the word toxic is in your language about yourself, you're really blowing it. You've made a serious error. I was so high. You're not high, you're low, actually. But we glorify sometimes drug use, alcohol use. It's a popular trope in culture, in the literature, and it's not always that poor, sorry soul. Sometimes it's sexed up and it's looked at as being something to be aspired for. People talk about how drunk, I was blackout drunk. Don't even remember. Oh my God. Going, whoa, yeah, hey. Like a bunch of pirates. Hey! And so that certainly goes on. And then sometimes people are like, oh man, I just slept like 14 hours. Usually that's linked to drug use. People who don't take drugs don't make those kind of stupid statements. But sometimes if you're in a culture of people who are on drugs, they'll talk, I slept like 16 hours straight. I'm like, yeah, it's like solid. Anybody who's actually familiar with the culture of drug use can attest to this. That's a glorification, an appreciation, an aspiration towards Thomas. So all three of these modes have some degree of appreciation in modern culture that you would be aware of. They're not put together in a clean category of upward mobility and downward pondering, and then kind of like staying the same. I mean, you could turn it into some kind of a metric that we would be familiar with that would make sense as a single categorization, or the three colors of yellow, blue, and red, with red being rajas and yellow being sattva and blue being tamas, and everything coming from that. Things which are good for you and things which are, bad for you, and things which are really bad for you, or things which are good for you now and in the future, and things which are good for you today but bad for you tomorrow, and things which are bad for you now and bad for you later. Like you eat meat. It's like bad for you now, bad for you later. You get involved in like an amour fou, like a crazy love relationship. Good now, bad later. And you uplift yourself with good associations. Good for you now, good later. Sometimes there's some austerity when you do things which are good for you. It bites a little bit. It requires some executive function. So there are ways we could take executive function as in psychology. It's the ability human beings have to control and focus and deny themselves indulgences temporarily for a higher purpose. And a whole host of abilities that human beings can cultivate that some human beings seem to lack, and some human beings have, and that if you work on them, you can improve your performance. So I want to give you guys a little bit of an understanding of the gunas, just because the word shows up. Guna yona vichalyate. You're not moved by the gunas. And you just think, guna vartan ityenam. You just think, oh, the gunas are working. Because udasina vadasina. Because your seat is indifferently. And then nengate, you don't flicker, you don't waver, you don't vacillate. Avatishtati, you're situated properly. Nengate, you don't flicker. You're solid. You're sober. You're stable. Do you guys follow this? So there's 4 parts of the verse, 4 quatrains of the verse. So number 1, Udasina Vadasina. You have a basic category of you're seated above it all. Then Yona Gunai Vichalyate. You're not moved by the gunas. Like when you say chalo, like let's go, chalo. That's chalo, means to move. Na vichalyate. You're not, you won't be moved by the gunas. Gunai, by the gunas, you won't be moved. Guna vartantyenam. You see, you think, it's just the gunas. Like you're watching the world going, you think, it's just the gunas mixing with each other. And then, avatishati nangate, you're situated properly and you're not flickering, you're not disturbed. You guys got the meaning of the verse? Okay. Here we go. Getting ready for takeoff. Buckle up, buttercup. Here it is. Generally speaking, when we talk about the gunas or when we talk about being above it all, we talk about being Zen, or we talk about being stoic, or if you get in there with a bunch of AA cult members, they'll tell you, you just got to accept the things that you can't change, and change the things you can, and accept the things you can't, and have the wisdom to know the difference. That's all about how we view the external world around us. I think there is equal utility, especially in the upper echelons, in the intermediate platform, in learning to look at yourself like this. Learning to look at yourself like this. In psychology, there are covert and overt behaviors. Overt behaviors are like sitting in a chair and like you go open the door or whatever. It's like the actual things you do, behaviors you have. Then there's covert behaviors. Psychologists have understood that there's a whole internal world, a whole numinous world, a world of mind, a world of thought, a world of feeling that is super linked to your overt world, your external world. But at the same time, it's linked, but at the same time, it's quite distinct. Did you follow that? For instance, you could be a police officer and you could hate somebody because of X, Y, Z. Maybe they killed your dog. And you hate them. But when they call 911 and you go to their house, you protect them exactly the same as you would anybody else. Because you got some integrity. So now you have an internal world, like, oh my God, that guy again. And that's a behavior. It's an internal behavior. It's a covert behavior. But the way you feel about the world is also a behavior. Anyway, cognitive behavioral therapy recognizes that you got to work on both the way we think about things as well as the way we act in the world, and that's really the magic. You burn the candle at both ends. You work on both sides simultaneously. I think that when we look at other people and we realize you're just following your conditioning, you can't do anything about it, and that person's just motivated by their lower nature, or they're tripping out because their parents freaked out on them and that's why they behave the way they do, or they've got commitment issues because of the way they grew up, the way they came up, or whatever it might be. They were deceitful because they had to learn a lot to survive. They had a rough situation growing up. You can start to look at the world and empathize with people, or just see, you know what, I'm not going to get too into it. Let them do what they're going to do. I'm not going to worry about it. You also have to learn to do that with yourself, with your covert behaviors. You should see them as behaviors as well. In Sanskrit, feelings are also considered to be behaviors, karmas. If you look at the qualities of a Brahmana, it says Brahma Karma Swabhavajam. Born of the Brahman's nature are his karma. What is his karma? Samadhamma tapashocham kshantir arjavamevacha. To be peaceful and equipoised and self-controlled and forgiving and tolerant and have integrity. Most of the Brahmana's qualities are internal mental qualities that have they will have some external manifestation, but they largely are about the way the Brahmana feels about the world and thinks about the world. You guys following this? I think we need to learn to look at how the gunas operate in our own lives. And we need to learn to just accept that too and not freak out about it. And we need to learn to understand the things that we have a responsibility to change. Like if somebody goes, hey, I'm just really selfish and mean and I just can't change it. I'm like, nah, sorry, we can fix that. You don't get a pass. You don't get to tell me that you're just selfish and narcissistic and you're deceitful and that's just who I am. And so like Krishna says, you gotta like learn to, accept things can't change, I'm deceitful. Actually, sorry, you can change that. So there are certain universal values and morals that we should all cultivate, objective, virtuous features that every human being has access to. It might not be equal opportunity, but at least there's opportunity for everybody. Did you guys follow that? Then there's a bunch of stuff you can't necessarily change about yourself, like depression. Severe depression is 50% caused by genetics and 25% caused by environment. And environment is oftentimes things you can't change. Not like environment like the weather, but environment like the social milieu you grew up in, which is largely, to a large extent, especially when you're a kid, beyond your control. And so with the more severe forms of depression, it's even more genetic. When they average it out, it's 50%, but when you go into the more severe forms of depression, it's more genetic. You may not be able to control whether you're depressed, whether you're bipolar, whether you're autistic, whether you're on the spectrum somewhere. These internal features of your existence, you also need to be a bit detached from them and just, they are what they are, and you need to figure out how to sit above them. This is a skill you can learn. Once you're seated a little bit above them and a little bit indifferent to them, and you see that the gunas are just acting, that separation of you from your thought processes actually gives you freedom to change them. If you think, I'm stressed out right now, and therefore I want to go take drugs or have sex or obsess over boys or whatever your thing is, that awareness that that's what's going on opens a door of opportunity where you have space between you and the pattern behavior, and that gives you room to move and not become a victim of your passions. When you say, I'm angry and I want to blame you for my problems. I'm angry and I want to project my problems onto you. I want to transfer my problem. You know these terms, projection and transference? Projection is, I feel like I was late to give class and I feel bad even though I drove like a banshee out of hell. And so, I guess the bat out of hell, the banshee's the way you scream. I just mixed metaphors, but you guys probably didn't catch it. And so, although banshees out of hell isn't really like, that does make sense. If there's a place where banshees lived, it would probably be hell. But you scream like a banshee and you move like a bat out of hell. Anyway, if I feel guilty that I didn't show up on time, I was a few minutes late, and I'm like, Narayan, I see the way you're looking at me, judging me for being late. That's projection. I feel guilty about it, so then I blame you as if you're calling me that thing. Do you follow this? Super low level. This is like, projections are like grade school level stuff. And you're all doing it. So, something we got to work on. Not projecting our issues onto other people because we lack the honesty with ourselves to admit how we feel. Projection essentially is an inability to acknowledge how you feel, and therefore you have to project it onto somebody else because you can't just go, I feel guilty because I was late. Did you follow this? You know? Or you're lusty and you're like, yeah, she's into me. I can see it. You know, when I walk in the room, I can see it the way she looks at me. She's into me. It's like, bro, you're probably into her. That's probably what's going on. You follow? So we project. So you got to deal with that. And it's pretty simple. Just be ridiculously and rigorously honest with yourself about how you feel and have the courage to talk about it and think about it. And there you go. Need for projection just evaporated. Generally speaking, to get rigorously honest with yourself, you got to get rigorously honest with somebody else who's smarter than you and more processed than you so they can help you see your own machinations. And then once you see them, now you can see them. Unless you're profoundly stupid, in which case none of the stuff in the class makes sense to you anyway, so don't worry about it. But if the stuff I'm saying makes sense to you, you have the ability. Once somebody helps you see it, if you can't see it yourself, and then through osmosis inherit that ability, and if you're honest with yourself, you can see it. Probably 90% of my job as a counselor is to get people to just be honest. The conversation goes real easy once people are honest. It's just everybody is so unbelievably deceitful with themselves. And people get offended, like, you're calling me a liar. I'm like, yeah, I'm calling you a liar, but I also mean you're lying to yourself. I'm not calling you a liar like you're some kind of Pinocchio and your nose is growing or something like that. I mean that you're living in a fully deceitful world where you're just not honest with yourself or anybody else. And I kind of think you know it. And so I'm trying to draw that out of you so we can have an honest dialogue. Once you acknowledge that I feel guilty about showing up late for class, or I feel guilty about my inability to be celibate, or I feel guilty about my inability to stay sober, or I feel guilty about lying to somebody to get ahead, or I feel guilty about betraying our friendship or compromising my values or my integrity in any one of myriad ways. Once you can own that, the need for projection goes out the window. Anyway, transference is when you start to treat somebody like somebody else in your life, and you start to transfer your issues with one person onto another person, etc. But they're not that person, and so you're living out this pattern where you end up like talking to your mother every other day, even though the person's not your mom, and you start freaking out on people for absolutely no reason because you have to put them into a box because you haven't figured out what you suffered and how it affected you and how your early relationships have really colored the way you view the world and really biased you to the world in a variety of ways. Once you recognize that, then you stop having to find your mom and your dad everywhere and repeat those relationships by looking for people who are like that or forcing people into a box. Is that a good definition of transference? Good working definition? So, we need to get a little bit aloof from ourselves the way a therapist or a shrink is aloof from their patient, and so they can shrink their problems down because they're sitting on the mountaintop looking at you milling about in your life like an idiot, and they can be, oh, you're doing this and you're doing this, and you're just like, wow, you shrunk all my problems down. You labeled them and shrunk them down. That was really cool. And so we need to learn to do that with ourselves by being udasinavat, by being above it all, even above our own conditioning. And that little bit of space, that last vestige of human freedom, to plagiarize Viktor Frankl, gives us room to decide how we want to react. And we're no longer programmed. Once you're like, oh, I'm looking for a fight, I'm like angry, I'm like walking in this conversation like looking for something to be upset about this person. And you tell them, I'm looking for a fight with you right now. You're not looking for a fight anymore. The mere act of seeing what you're doing frees you from it 75 to 90%. It's ridiculous how liberating it is. That's why I spend so much time in my own life with the people I talk to and with the people I counsel. Just getting everything on the table. Because once it's all on the table, it's relatively easy to navigate. And I'm savage, as most of you well know. When we sit down, I will say the most ridiculous stuff. I think you feel like this. Sometimes I don't know. I just throw it out there because I don't care. I don't care. I don't care if I look like an idiot. Whatever. I'll say something ridiculous, Just get it out there on the table. What's the worst that happens? They're like, oh, you're projecting your own thing onto me. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. Regular when I meet someone, I'm like, hey, you gay? They're I want to punch me in the face. Or sometimes they go, yeah, I am. And I'm in the closet. I haven't told anybody. And thanks for opening that door so we can talk about it. That happens too. Or people are like, maybe you're gay, and that's why you're asking. I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure. Whatever, okay. And so, as a counselor, one of the reasons why I just always take it to the edge is I want to get to some truth, and nobody's willing to just go there on their own. So by me saying it, it's like it's my issue. You follow? It makes it a lot easier for people to loosen up because I've said all the weird stuff that they're thinking, and so now it's on me. And now I've just taught them it's not that big of a deal, and you don't have to hide nothing because here I am just like vomiting, every taboo topic known to man. That bravery and that courage with yourself, with other people, to open doors, to let there be honest communication, to get it all on the table, to do it in a non-threatening, non-judgmental way. To be a little aloof when people kick and scream like a child, and you kick and scream like a child when people are trying to give you the medicine. Other people are just kicking and screaming like a child, blaming you for everything under the sun, and you can just be a little bit aloof. Great stuff comes out of that. You can do a lot of therapy like that with yourself and with other people. But the big thing I want to focus on tonight was this idea that these verses about seeing the gunas, about being aloof, about being detached, they're also about being detached from your own issues. And when you're a little detached from your own issues, you can start to say, I have this issue. I tend to do this. Not in a self-indulgent way where you're giving yourself a permission slip to do it, but in a therapeutic way where you're putting it on the table so people can call you out if you start slipping. If you start going down that negative road and that negative pattern, and you called yourself out to your friends, they've now got a legend to the map of your life. They can call you out on stuff. They can also manipulate and take advantage of you, but there's a cure for that too. You know how to not get cheated and conned and manipulated? Don't look for sweet nothings. A calm person promises you something for nothing and gives you nothing for something. Every time there's a lie, there's a liar and a liee. The liee wants that lie to be true as much as the liar makes it true. There's a difference between where you are and where you want to be. And so you find someone who will lie to you and tell you what you want to hear before you actually deserve it. Like sometimes with my students, I'll be like, oh, I think I gave a lousy class. They'll be like, no, it was a great class. I'm like, no, it wasn't. You're just too foolish to know. I know I gave a lousy class. I'm listening to myself speak. I know when I'm making sense, I know I'm on point when I'm not. And I know when I give a good class. And if you guys don't get it, it's because you're asleep. I can hear myself speak. I'm following my class. I'm listening to my own class. Obviously, there's a benefit to me getting constructive criticism and feedback. But I have a basic sense of whether I'm speaking coherently or not, whether I'm making my point sink or not, whether what I'm saying is powerful or not. So when somebody goes, "Oh, you gave a great class," I know I didn't. I'm like, "Why are you telling me I gave a great class? You sycophant. What's going on with that?" You follow? Does my butt look fat in this? I don't know. Is your butt fat? If your butt's fat, it probably looks fat now. No need to ask. Like, if you're really interested in what your butt looks like, get a couple mirrors and do that gig and check out your butt. Every day, no problem. Get a scale, check stuff out on the scale. You'll know whether you're fat or not. You don't have to ask me. You know if you're fat. If you can be really honest with yourself, then nobody gets over on you by lying to you. Because when they start telling you something that's not true, you're honest enough with yourself where you're like, that doesn't smell right. What do you got going on there? You become a truth seeker. You don't have any need for lies. And then liars aren't attracted to you. They're like flies. They look for fecal matter. They look for people with that going on. Does this make sense? So, we've got these verses about being aloof from the gunas. The straightforward prima facie meaning that all of us need to get is how to look at others and what they're doing to us and not get so caught up on an us versus them game and friends and enemies game. And you see that people are working out their conditioning and it's not so much about you and they're not so much attacking you. They're just working out their own conditioning and it makes you a little bit aloof and you can sleep better at night. You get a little less insomnia and you start feeling like the world is filled with friends and enemies so much and you realize everybody, friends and enemies, is really just working out their patterns. And that makes you aloof from the world. And that same principle, when you start to look at yourself with a little bit of aloofness, with a little bit of above it allness. When you start looking at yourself with a little bit above it allness, then you can start to see your own patterns. And once you can see them, they're no longer patterns. Once you can see them, the pause button's been pressed, and you can now pick and choose how you want to behave. How do you get there? You hang out with people who are there, and then they show you the way, and then you take responsibility. There's a bit of grace in there, and there's also some personal responsibility. It's a nice synergistic mix. And you learn to be rigorously honest with yourself. Usually by hanging out with rigorously honest people that leave no stone unturned and are just profoundly honest with themselves. And to be profoundly honest with yourself, you have to really be okay with yourself. Otherwise, you want somebody telling you your butt's not fat and your hair's not falling out. And you look good in that even when you don't. And you spoke well even when you didn't. And you start to look for those people who whisper sweet nothings in your ear. And you want it to be true. So you say it's true. You put your trust when it shouldn't have been done because you didn't really deserve the accolade you got. And then you pay for it on the back end. If on the other hand, you learn the art of being rigorously honest, again, by hanging out with people who are rigorously honest, letting them do a little surgery, and then picking up the cross and following them, going on that hero's journey. And that rigorous honesty presses pause and gives you room to move. And you're no longer just in the mix. You're above it all. And from being above it all, you can start to pick and choose. You walk into a conversation, I'm super triggered right now, looking for a reason to get upset, looking for a reason to blame you for my problems. You walk into a conversation with another human being like that, you're not going to do that. Because you just said it. You just showed your cards. I'm super lusty now. I'm like thinking about acting out. I'm super craving alcohol and drugs right now. Once you call somebody up and say that, you just press pause. And there's room to navigate and figure that out. Go deeper. Figure out what the problem is. Troubleshoot. Problem solve. You bought yourself time. So the thought I had that I want to share with you guys today, that I've shared with you now, and I'm synopsizing and wrapping things up, is we shouldn't just think about the gunas as out there. It's like that Pogo cartoon. You can Google it, Pogo. It's a cartoon from the 40s. We've met the enemy, and he's us. The gunas aren't just out there. They're in here. You don't just need to be aloof from the gunas out there. You need to be aloof from them in here. How do you do that? You got to separate yourself. How do you do that? Hang out with people who know that art. Have them call you out. Pick up on what they teach you. Then start doing it with yourself. How do you create that space? Call yourself out on your issues. Be rigorously honest with yourself. Stop looking for sweet nothings. Okay. Thank you very much, IGTV. You guys got some feedback for me?